Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Muslim Matters podcast, where we discuss everything under the sun that affects Muslims, such as faith, local and global politics, social media, sex education, civil rights, and family matters, all coming from a traditional Orthodox perspective. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle, Muslim Matters, and check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org.
And welcome to the Muslim Matters podcast. I am your host, Zainab bint Younus. Today's guest is Amire Hoxha. Amire is a mechanical drafter by trade, a reader by heart, and the author of Amar's Fajr reward. Her meticulous nature helps her identify quality and assess books. Aside from her online presence, Amire had also established, curated, and grown her local masjid library for 7 years. Amire, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's so great to have you again. We did do a previous podcast many years ago about refugee representation in literature, especially Kidlit. But today we're here to talk about a little something different. We're here to talk mostly about you being an author, mashallah alayki, about your book and the process of writing a book. So to start with, I know you're from Kosovo, although you currently live in North America, and your book is set in Kosovo as well. So tell us about this choice.
Yes, I came here in 1999, which is almost 3 decades ago, and being in the Muslim kid lit space as a reviewer for the past almost 7 years has given me a huge insight of what kind of books are out there, especially in something as niche as Muslim kidlit. And when I say Muslim kidlit, why I think it's niche is because we are already a minority in the West, and within that minority, there's another minority who actually reads and values reading literature. Having been in this kind of space for so many years, it gives you a fair idea of what kind of books are being written about, what kind of cultural representations are written about when it comes to Muslim literature, may it be in Islamic books but we're mainly talking about Muslim voices, Muslim stories, so fictional stories. And I think aside from three chapter books being published traditionally, in which all three are written by non-Kosovar voices. They are American voices who happen to write these stories because they never existed. It gave me that push to say, hey, there's something here that we need our stories to be represented. And within the Muslim kidlit space, we have a lot of Arab representation, we have a lot of Pakistani representation, we have, alhamdulillah, more Somali voices are coming about, and huge variety of other diverse stories. And I think that's what's pushed me to say, hey, we need a Balkan story. And we've seen a few of Bosnian stories starting to crawl out into the spotlight, but not many, even then, not many. Yeah, this is what gave me the push to write my story, Amar's Fajr Award.
I love that. I think it's so important to be able to not just recognize a missing voice amongst the literature sphere, but also to be able to contribute to that, to filling that niche. I think that's so incredible because that takes a lot of courage and that takes a lot of dedication as well. What was behind your story itself? Your story is about a little boy and his grandfather going for Fajr, and there's a challenge that they have to overcome. What was the inspiration for that?
When I tell people where I'm from throughout my life, when I've said, oh, I'm from Kosovo, they've always thought, oh, there used to be a war there. Is it safe there? And those who were familiar, and then some were not familiar at all. Where is that? My first story, I wanted it to be a story of joy. Okay, so I didn't want it to be a story of displacement, which is my experience, story of displacement or sadness or anguish, or I wanted it to be a story of joy. And Mars Fajr Award is based on my grandfather. May Allah have mercy on him. He valued prayer. And even though he passed away when I was just 7 years old, I have vivid memories of him making wudu in the garden, and as soon as he heard the adhan, and he'd be out the door, and he valued prayer, and especially prayer at the masjid. I think I wrote on one of my posts about him is that this was also a way of honoring him and his dedication to salah. He was in his deathbed after a stroke, and he made sure he did his prayers while he was half of his body was paralyzed. And this particular story about Salah, he he lived at a time when there was communism government under Yugoslavia, before Kosovo was an independent state. And so there was a lot of influence about how many people go to the masjid, and it's only the elderly who go to the masjid. And under this rule, a lot of, although they were allowed to practice, everybody was allowed to practice their religion, it was fairly controlled about how that looked. And at the same time, they pushed secular holidays and secular celebrations and secular activities. So for him to go through life under this kind of communist government and leadership, and not to waver his Islam and not to have his salah be compromised, is very telling. And so I wanted one particular instance where he goes to the masjid, and he finds the masjid door locked, because not a lot of people aspire to attend salah at the masjid. So in many instances, he would find the courtyard of the masjid door locked, and he found a way to jump over the courtyard walls, and he would go in and make adhan and pray Fajr on his own. And in this particular instance, he sprained his foot. And that's exactly what happened to my grandfather. Of course, Amar wasn't in the picture in his real experience, but I put Amar there to inspire the young readers, to inspire the young readers that they can learn from the older generation, and they can be inspired and guided and through the generations before us. Because sometimes we think, oh, they're older, they're not as good with technology, and they have an older mindset, but they are full of wisdom. Our grandparents, grandmas and grandpas are full of wisdom that when we are kids we tend to scoff over, but as we get older ourselves, we wish we could have had more time with them to learn that wisdom from them. So this book was honoring him and his dedication to salah and his iman and deen.
That's so beautiful. Mashallah, mashallah. Like, what a beautiful picture that you've painted for us. And I absolutely love this connection, both of your grandfather and the grandfather in the story embodying that love for Salah and that connection with the younger generation, and creating such a powerful learning moment that became such a strong, like, a memory for you in terms of your what your grandfather actually did, and then for kids who are reading this to be like, oh wow, that's such an adventure. People don't really associate things like salah or going to the masjid with something like adventure, so I think that was
Mhm.
beautifully done. I highly recommend everybody go out and buy your book, because it's so important to have these stories for our kids to see. Tell us more about the
I
actual
mean,
process of writing the book as well.
we have a hard time with our kids today in trying to inspire them to do salah and pray salah and do it on time. And even we live close to our local masjid, and sometimes it gets hard to get my son to get him to go to the masjid and attend the masjid, because of course in the west, back home, the masajid are like elementary schools are here, like every neighborhood has one. Whereas here in the West, for many Muslims, they have to drive to go to the masjid and attend salah in congregation. That was another reason why I tried to inspire my kids through storytelling as well.
Again, that's truly valuable for us from the. So tell us more about the process of actually writing your book,
Yeah.
because there's
So,
also a huge difference too between people who have been immersed in studying how to write, doing MFAs, things like that. As far as I know, you have not gone through that process, and yet, mashallah, you've really been dedicated to the developing of your craft. And not only that, but writing when English is not your first language.
Yeah, I was going to tie all of that. When I first came to Canada, 12 years old, my strength was math. Of course, math is a universal language. You don't have to speak another language in order to communicate with math, right? That was my strength. And because English was my weakness, I spent a lot of time and energy just not just learning English, but writing English. And even when it comes to careers, I chose a career that was math focused, right? And even after being in Canada for so many years and having, even though you chose a career path with math, in a professional world, you need to be able to articulate emails and communication through your clients and all of that. And when it comes to imposter syndrome or being confident in speaking and writing or lacking that confidence, in my career also, I've had situations where coworkers have told me, "Oh, you're not very articulate with your emails to so and you need to resend and ask them this question and that question
That
about
is so rude.
their mathematical drawings and such." So when you have experiences like that over time, it stays with you and sticks with you and adds to your lack of self-esteem. You know what I mean? And so when it came to writing my book and my story, I've always thought I'm writing it, but it's not going to go anywhere. And little did I know my very first it got published. And working with editors and having a group of supportive system of sisters, hearing those encouraging words and hearing the positive feedback, it was just such a breath of fresh air because it makes me go back to my childhood. And I wish those words were said to me in my childhood, and maybe we would be different. We would be somewhere different. We would have a different path. When it comes to developing craft, like this, Amar's Fajr reward was a completely different story when I first wrote my first draft. Who wants to hear about a grandpa spraining their foot going to the masjid? I made up a story where he sprained his foot when he was on the way to the masjid. I'm like, nobody is going to believe a story about grandpas climbing a wall. And if you do that here in Canada, that's like trespassing. So it's a different kind of mentality and different kind of cultural approach. So I had made a completely different book, and then with we had a meeting with my publisher and her editor. And then when I told them about my grandfather's story and what inspired the story, they said, "Why isn't that the story? Why are you making up a new story? But it's even more meaningful, you know?" So I think it goes back to having that lack of self-confidence and the stories that we want to tell about our culture and our representation, and are we able to do it justice? And part of that all goes back to the root cause, which is lack of confidence and having a not a healthy self-esteem about, does my story want to be heard? Really, who wants to hear about my story? Who wants to? Whereas on the opposite end, as a reviewer, I want to read all the stories. I want to read all the cultures. I want to be able to immerse myself Muslim characters and the rich diversity of the Muslim ummah that we have around the world. Like Islam is nearly in every corner of the world, and we've never heard some of these stories before. So I had to get over that bump as well. As who wants to read my story about Kosovo? About set in Kosovo. It all ties together. And one of my bigger problems about imposter syndrome, because of those negative comments that I've had growing up about my English, whether spoken or written, when I write a draft, like I find it very burdensome on myself. Like I am my biggest obstacle, me, myself, and I, because I write and then if I don't like it, I scrap the whole thing and I start over. Which is, I need to learn to develop from that story, from those little pieces of gold that are within those drafts. So that was a huge learning curve for me for sure.
I'm really glad that you got over that. At least I hope you got over that properly because I
I
want
don't
more
think
stories from you.
I will ever get over it. I think it's just I have to learn to manage it as I go, actually.
But it's such a valid and true point about on one side, like as a writer, you're like, who cares about me and my little story? But then as reviewers, we're like, no, we want all the stories from everyone, please. So I'm glad that
Exactly.
you are going ahead and you're writing those stories because we need them. We really do. And as you said, like we have so much like Arab and Desi representation, and now like more increasing Somali representation as well, which is amazing and wonderful, and we want more of it. But we need to have an understanding of again how diverse the Ummah really is, and
Mhm.
there's so unless you meet people from the Balkans in your own community, it's very easy to forget that they are a sizable part of the Ummah. And there's so little that many of us, especially people like me, I'm Desi, and I grew up mostly around Desis and Arabs in the community. And it's
Mhm.
very difficult to find perspectives outside of that. And as it is, the Muslim Kidlit space is a lot smaller than in traditional publishing alone. And to find the stories that tie in diversity of Muslim cultures, diversity of Muslim experiences, but specifically those that are grounded in Islam is so hard to find. And so, again, I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you went ahead and you wrote the story, which, again, like the very core of that story is Salah, which is wonderful.
Even what's fascinating is for me growing up in Kosovo until basically grade 6, half of grade 6, we you even though there's a Muslim majority, you don't learn Islam in schools.
Hmm.
That's something that your parents had to make an effort to do. So going back 3 years ago, I took my kids for the very first time in Kosovo, and we stayed there for about a month and a half. And I was looking for books, and there's a huge store there that's in every city. Kosovo is very small, but in all the cities, there's a bookstore, and they have a huge range of books for kids and teens and adults. One of the things that's fairly disappointing is when I met with an author who wrote a book about a law in Albanian
Hmm.
and offered to have her book to be stocked in this big bookstore. They told her, no, you have to take it to an Islamic bookshop or
Oh, so
Islamic store.
disappointing.
And what I find fascinating is Islam is such a huge part of our it's a huge part of our people. It's a huge part of our identity and history. And for them, like we are in the West, you go to Barnes and Nobles, you have Islamic books and Muslim stories that are inside those bookstores. So why in a majority Muslim country these things are treated like they're separate entities? So it was a wake up call for me, even like, why isn't there a book that represents both my culture, my heritage, as well as my faith? And I wanted my kids to also see that because when I went there, I was looking for books, even if they were in Albanian, I was looking for those types of books and they were hard to find. So this is another huge reason why I wanted both to mesh both the culture and the religion in a kid's book.
Tying that back to what you said about mainstream bookstores not, or at least the bookstores in Kosovo not stocking specifically Islamic books, what challenges have you faced marketing your book? What are the challenges that Muslim authors face in general when marketing? As it is, we already know that in traditional publishing, it really depends on who your publisher is, how well known of an author you are, what kind of book deal that you get, and all that depends on whether your publisher is going to do a lot of marketing for you or if it's all on your own. And I expect that you have a similar challenge. You went with a Muslim publisher, but a fairly not high budgeted one. So, what challenges have you faced in terms of the marketing and knowing your audience, and how do you sell your books?
Honestly, locally, I sell my book among other Islamic books and Muslim books. So in the past year, I've seeing this gap of having very limited access to Islamic books and Muslim stories here locally. Since basically last December, I've been sourcing Islamic books from UK and Canada and US and Turkey, and I'm very selective of what I bring, but I'm trying to make these books more accessible. When it comes to online, it's honestly it's a bit difficult to say because I don't know, like, I don't sell my book online personally. I Any posts that I do about my book, I refer to them to go to the publisher's website. And I don't know how much of my marketing is actually turns into sales. But
Hmm.
I try to post. Another thing that I don't like to do, that as an author you have to step out of the comfort zone, is to sell your book or market your book, put yourself out there and say, hey, I wrote a book. I can easily do that for anybody else and anybody else's book. I can easily say, hey, this book is amazing, go get it from such and such author, or this book is incredible, or what have you. I can easily do that about anybody else's book. When it comes to
Hmm.
my book, it's a little bit more difficult. It took me a long time to even accept the fact that, hey, I've actually written a book. You have to do what you can with what you have. For me, I've been trying to make posts and pin my posts, and trying to also on my personal page, I have posts on there as well. But how much of that actually turns into,
Into
you know,
sales.
copies being sold, I have no idea. I have no idea. I think one of the biggest things is if those people who don't have an online presence to follow publishers and authors and the books that they're being, how do you reach those people who don't have an online presence? And this is the question. This is the $1 million question, because ever since I decided to sell books locally, and there's a reason why I refuse to sell online, because online there's so many people who sell online already.
Yeah, there's a pretty
I
huge
want
saturation
the
there.
parents of our local community to flip through those pages, to flip through those books, and see that these books actually exist and they are available, because a lot of them have no idea that these books actually exist. They don't know where to start to look. So we have to do our part, whether me as an author or as a reader, as a librarian, teacher, or any position that you hold, that and you're aware of these books. We have to actually put in the work to bring more exposure to these books. Just the mere fact that the to show the Muslim community yet that yes, these books exist.
That's a really
So
good
it's
point
kind of a
about.
challenging question for me, because I don't know what has been helping, if my posts are helping, if my I'm supposed to be doing a story time with my local Islamic school. I'm supposed to be doing a story time for on Zoom for an international school. So I don't know how, like, this is my first kind of gig, so to say, my first book and my first published work. So I find it a little bit challenging to get the word out there.
It's a good point that you make about the difference between the saturation online. You're right. There's definitely a very active niche of, I say, like a lot of homeschooling mommies or very Islamically invested moms who are doing the research, who are, a lot of them are having their own Islamic bookstores that they're selling from online, as you said, versus where when we see in our own personal communities, whether it's people accessing the libraries like the Masjid Library or the Medcas Library for me, and awareness of Muslim books, and even like having value, placing value in access to Muslim books, it's such a huge difference. And I really
Yes.
admire that you have committed to just like selling locally and expanding awareness that way as well. Because
Yeah.
when we are online, we get into our little social media bubbles. And of course, like we curate that intentionally on purpose because we want to be with like minded people. But it's really important for those of us who are invested in just reading and literature and understanding the value of literature for all of society, but especially for Muslim kids, that we see that there's actually a very distinct lack of appreciation for reading and literature and Islamic books for our kids in the quote unquote real world, in our actual local communities. I don't know if it's different in other cities or in other countries, but you and I are both in roughly the same area of Canada, in Western Canada. And even though we're in different cities, I think there's a similar kind of resistance toward putting their money where their mouth is. Everybody was like, oh, yeah, I want my kids to be good Muslims and have exposure to good Muslim material. But then when that comes with a price tag, people are like, oh, is it even really worth it? Like, why do we care about stories anyway? And that ties into my next question for you, which is that in your experience as you've been selling books, as you've been doing book fairs and school fairs and things like that, what types of books do you see selling well that Muslim parents are picking up? And do you think that it's necessarily like the best kinds of books that Muslim parents should be picking up? Or are there maybe focusing just on one type of book that isn't reflective of how valuable there are other types of like Muslim stories and the impacts that those stories have on kids?
Yes, being in the bazaars and the book fairs, what the kids choose to purchase versus what the parents choose to purchase for their kids are two entirely different things. So, Muslim parents are always looking for Islamic, non-fiction Islamic books, like stories of the prophets or the names of Allah or anything that is fully Islamic, right? Whereas you have kids who are looking for fun stories, and a lot of girls will gear towards a cute book cover, and the boys will be looking at maybe graphic novels. I think what I find fascinating is the disconnect, I think, between the value that we place on nonfiction and fiction. I think nonfiction, nobody disagrees that nonfiction is important for us to teach our kids the fundamentals of Islam, whether it's five pillars or how to do your salah or talk about the names of Allah, learning the names of Allah or stories of the prophets and what have you. We all agree to that on that, right? But what I see parents not value as is the fictional stories. Like the fictional stories is what bring those Islamic values to life. Islamic values cannot be just dryly explained about how to be brave, how to have good manners, how to have good character, how to be like, if you're just keep repeating on be like the prophet, be kind, be like the prophet, smile, be like if we have a story, a fundament a story that is engaging, that pulls you in emotionally, and can be told in a relatable way while also portraying a set of Islamic values. Yes, maybe you will learn it from the story of Nuh or Musa or Isa alayhi. When you write a story that is relatable to kids, let's say you write a story about not wanting to learn and you want to play video games, and the fact that you want to finish that video game and not pause it and do your salah, this is what entices the young readers to read. And I think Muslim parents need to put a little bit more value on those fictional stories. Fictional stories have so much to offer, just as much as nonfiction Islamic texts. I just feel like it's easier to sell Islamic stories, but Islamic books. But for example, the parents, they love prophet stories or 30 hadiths for kids or du'as for kids and how to incorporate them. Those are amazing. But those can be something that can be used as a reference. Okay, we're having a hard day. How do we manage our emotions? Let's go back and look into our resources. What does the hadith say, or what does the say? You know what I mean? As when you're displaying in a nonfiction how to navigate that and how to manage that and what kind of actions are okay and what kind of actions are not okay when you're in that emotional turmoil, you are connecting with the reader in a deeper level. You know what I mean? So I think more value needs to be placed into fictional stories, because they also serve a purpose of reinforcing Islamic values and characters and mannerisms, which the Prophet ﷺ taught us, as well as what the Quran teaches us.
That is such a perfect way of putting it. The Islamic nonfiction textbooks, or the picture books that, or they look like picture books but come off as very textbooky, preachy sources of information, they have their place, but that's not what kids are going to absorb as meaningful and providing emotional connection. And Muslim parents overlook the science and the art of storytelling completely and think that all those things don't matter when they really do. In fact, we forget that the seerah is essentially storytelling his life so that we can connect to it. The Quran is filled with stories that we can connect to emotionally. And I just find it so sad that in the name of, oh, we just want Islamic content for our kids, so many Muslim parents don't realize that education isn't just about drilling information into a child's head. It's about building a strong emotional connection with them to that information. How do you do that? It's through that storytelling. So
Mhm.
thank you for highlighting that bit, because it's such a pet peeve. It's such a pet peeve of mine. When we need more creative stories, we need more of these emotional connections, and we need more unique angles in Muslim storytelling. And that takes me to the next part of our podcast, talking about the Muslim Book Awards. So you and I, as well as Shifa Safadi and Kiran Nabi, known as Muslim Mommy Blog and Islamic School Librarian, respectively, we are the 4 judges of the Muslim Book Awards, and I am shamelessly plugging it because these awards exist because we want to highlight and celebrate Muslim books and Muslim authors and the things that we care about in Muslim literature. So let's have our bookish rant about what it is that we're looking for and what we love, the common factors in winning books, and what we want more of and what we don't want more of. I'm going to start because it ties into what you were just saying about the nonfiction versus the fictional stories. What I want to see this year and in all the upcoming years, inshallah, is Muslim authors moving away from the idea that, oh, to write an Islamic book, my story or my book has to be preachy. It has to have just Islamic information, and the characters are never going to do anything wrong or bad or making a mistake, and they're just going to be perfect all the time. Or the only way for me to teach kids about Ramadan is going to be a kid's first fast, and somehow they don't know what suhoor is and they don't know what tarawih is, and ah these are like the most annoying stilted tropes that we constantly see in Islamic material, and it's driving me insane. I want to see creative ways of providing Islamic information in a storytelling way, in a unique perspective. Jenny Mollendijk wrote an incredible book called Dear Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I to this day it remains one of my favorites because she manages to share the Shama'il Muhammadiyah, like the descriptions of the Prophet sallallahu in a way that was so different from any other kids book that I've seen around that. Like usually it's, oh, Prophet Muhammad was very kind, and then gives like some vague example of how that happened. But she did it in such a unique way through a little boy writing a letter to Prophet and connecting Rasul physical description and the description of his character with this little boy and this little boy's life. And it was so beautiful, and I remain obsessed with it, and I want to see more unique takes like that, but again, not copying, but coming up with something unique and different. So, what are you looking for this year for the awards and for upcoming awards?
This year for the awards, honestly, I'm trying to get myself going with the reading, and I'm looking forward to, yeah, having unique topics and unique takes on how to write an enticing story. I think being aware, I think what tends to happen with a lot of authors is, I don't know if they read a lot of what is in the industry. Like, we have the common sayings in Islam, alhamdulillah, these types of books that tend to just write a list of things. I say Bismillah when I eat. I say Bismillah when and I say Allah when I'm thankful. And I think we've seen it. Those books have definitely deserve a space on our shelves, but what more can you bring to make that, rather than a list in a book? What more can you bring creativity wise to get the reader more engaged? So definitely creativity. I think one of Jenny's Ramadan books that I find quite unique. I'm not sure if that book has been entered for the awards this year or not. It's Just Right Ramadan. That one, like, she has an eye on, honestly, she has an eye on bringing unique themes and stories to life and filling those gaps. Yeah, the Ramadan stories about the first fasts are just what is, I don't want to say worse, because but what is baffling to me is those Ramadan stories when they have a 5-year-old kid who, whoa, has no idea what Ramadan is until the first day of Ramadan. Like, when you think logically about your family, my family, we discuss Ramadan continuously about what Ramadan is, and Ramadan is coming and we are preparing and all of that. It's not just some kids just fell off of a different planet and just realized, hey, today is Ramadan. What does that mean? That goes back to trying to have a story that connects emotionally to the reader. So something that is emotionally enticing with the readers, something that is unique, something that is relatable. It just, if there's no emotion, it makes it a little bit more difficult to pick it up the second time and the third time to read it with my kids, as a parent who reads with their kids still.
What are the things that you really want to see that from the awards from Muslim books outside of the general Islamic stuff?
Oh, that's a hard question. Yeah, so even if the story is a Muslim story, a Muslim voice, I think to just put on a hijab on a character and have Muslim names, I think we've gone past the giddiness of it to call, yes, it is a representation, and yes, there is space for those stories to be told and normalized in children's books. For me personally, I want to see a little bit more layers of Islam put into it. Saying in a picture book, maybe saying salam, or maybe saying alhamdulillah, or if it's not centered in an Islamic undertone, at least show that this family of Muslims, or these characters of Muslim characters, that Muslim identity in different aspects. So I think for me it has to be the a little more than just the names or just the hijab.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not just about the token checklist of like Islamic representation, like you said, the hijab or the salam or whatever, but really incorporating an awareness of Islam in the characters'
Yeah.
lives, even if they're making mistakes. And like we see this like with middle grade, I would say it's challenging because a lot of parents are like, "Oh, I don't want my kids reading about a kid who like I don't know, steals or has a crush or whatever." But like these are all normal developmental milestone experiences that kids are going through. And I want to see those experiences shared in a way where, yeah, the kid screws up, but then they have a love for Allah and
Yeah.
that is guiding them to do the right thing. His book
You
Golden
know,
Girl did an
imagine,
amazing job of this, actually. And I was like so blown away by how she really portrayed that. And it's really hard to find in a lot of like middle grade books, even chapter books.
yeah.
YA, obviously, we end up having sometimes going like the extreme more in the direction of I love God, but like I don't have to be a practicing Muslim. Like just loving Allah is enough, and I'm just gonna go and have a boyfriend or something.
This is the difference, right? We all have to make sure, this is why we read and review books, and we encourage parents to do the same. Or at least if they don't read the book, look up a review. And if you feel like the book, the review is is in line with what your perspective is, then we've done our job. For me, it's not lying, right? Are you? If we, who are we portraying? If we portray children like walking around and quoting hadith and walking around and making, which child, mine certainly don't, which child goes around walking around and reminding people about this hadith and that hadith? That's in a perfect world. And I think writing books like that does a disservice to our readership, because they're reading about someone who they cannot connect with, because they feel like this person is just such a goody two shoes. You cannot connect with that person in an emotional level. God forbid, like, how many adults go around saying, "Oh, this conversation relates to this hadith," and this conversation, not very many. Sorry?
Even those of us who are like, we try to be religious, when you have somebody who's like going around just like being super preachy and annoying all the time, that's not an organic, healthy relationship. That's not an organic way to do dawah. That's just being
Exactly. So
obnoxious.
how are these mistakes or sins, or how are they being portrayed in the story? Are they being diminished and saying, "Hey, so what, Islam says you're not supposed to have a girlfriend or boyfriend," or are they being like, "Okay, yes, I seem to develop these feelings towards somebody, and how do I do that? How do I navigate that as a Muslim person? Or if I have this bad habit of stealing, or bad habit of backbiting, or bad habit of spreading rumors," and acknowledging that, yes, Islam, this is not what Islam preaches, but this is a fault of my own. So, how is the author distinguishing that? How is the story distinguishing that? And how is the character growing and learning how to navigate? Because essentially, it's these characters are a learning tool, right? I'm sorry, but our kids, we can lecture them all day and night, but when you have somebody in a character who's their age, and they're explaining and expressing the frustrations of daily life of a middle schooler, how navigating school and home and madrasa and all of these things, they connect differently, and they might learn from it in a different way, and they might see that perspective be more effective in helping them make their choice and how to navigate their struggle. So yes, we have to write about sinful things in order to teach kids, like, how is that being portrayed. Not everything that is written about that is sinful is a form of praise, no. So that's depends. It's all how it's written, how it's being portrayed, and is Islam, are Islamic values or stances being diminished when it comes to those sins, or is it being valued and recognized as a human, instead of diminishing the Islamic stance, and I'm gonna act on my desire anyway?
Yeah, the really important bit that you mentioned is that describing something or mentioning it does not automatically equal praise or encouragement. It's just addressing that this exists and how that character develops through it is the really important point. I want to wrap this up just by saying that for all that we get irritated about these kinds of things, what I think is really important to encourage and highlight as well is just the importance of well developed craft. And you touched on this already, and that's not just the don't make the books preachy and boring and annoying, but knowing how to write and studying how to write. As an editor for and a writer and a reviewer, this has been something that I have always harped on about. And the more I immerse myself in like studying editing, or the more that I immerse myself even in writing, because like now as I write, I'm aware of what my writing tics are. What are the things that, those little quirks that I do a lot and I have to actively edit out because it's just really annoying to read. And refining your story and refining your writing in a way that really makes the story worth reading. I think a lot of Muslim authors, especially those who go the self published route or who go through Muslim publishers, but these Muslim publishers do not have an in house editor who's actually qualified and knows what they're doing. They're just like, oh yeah, Muslim story stamp, let's throw it out there, without looking at things like developmental editing, character arcs, plotting, all these things. Even honestly, as simple as how to structure a sentence. Like, I cannot tell you how it drives me insane when we receive books for the awards and there's like sentences that, like, one single sentence will be an entire paragraph long, and for what? And this is supposed to be like a kid's picture book. Come on, these are the very basic fundamentals of writing that you're supposed to learn in like middle school. And if
You
you're
know
going
what's
to call
funny?
yourself an author, come on, like sit down
You,
and take 5 minutes to learn how
You know
to
what's
write
funny?
in good structure.
I learned run-on sentences here when I was learning English, and there's no such rule when it comes to the Albanian language. Sometimes when I see walls of text in when I'm reading in Albanian, I'm like, where's that period at the end of that huge sentence? So for me, maybe because of my self esteem and confidence, if I'm able to pick out that there's something wrong in the text, then probably needed more polishing. But I'm honestly not as much of a stickler as others when it comes to the craft itself. I keep myself open minded because I'm still learning and I'm still learning the craft. And honestly, learning the craft, I think, is a never ending journey. I think just like we consistently spend our entire lifetime learning Islam and listening to lectures and honing and focusing on different aspects of Islam, we're constantly learning. So I think when it comes to craft, I think I'm always learning.
That's fair. I
I'm
will say
always
I am
learning.
the annoying editor person amongst the judges. I like if I see missing punctuation marks or I see those run-on sentences or I just see like clumsy writing, it makes me angry. It makes me viscerally angry. And I'm not saying you have to hire me, but please, for the love of God, hire any editor who knows what they're doing. And that's going to be my unending rant forever. Hire an editor. Hire an editor. I don't expect authors to know or be able to like pick out everything on their own, and that's part of the writing process. When I write, I send my work to an external editor because I know I need fresh eyes on it to pick out the things that like I'm too deep in the work itself to be able to distinguish very easily, whereas I am the fresh eyes for other writers, so I can rip theirs apart really easily, but I can't do the same for myself. And I think Muslim authors really need to understand this and the importance of getting multiple sets of eyes on their work before they
Yes.
put it out to publish.
This point I agree with because going through the process of my book, and I just, by the end of when we were coming to the end of the book, and I just was seeing it so many times, so often about a comma there and a word there and a punctuation mark there. It just gets to the point where it's, oh, this is not over yet.
Yep.
And I learned that it's so important to have a fresh set of eyes to look at it, who eyes who are in the industry and who are editors, right? To have a fresh set of eyes to look, rather than having this circulate between only a handful of people. So I see that with this book, I see that that could have been a huge advantage because if you're working on a book, no matter which position you're in, whether you're the author or the editor or whoever else is involved, because you're seeing it from the point that it was a first draft and developed once and twice and three times and 15 times and 18 times, I think you, in your mind, you compare it to what it was and how far it has come, that by the end you need that fresh set of eyes to look at it and see it for the first time and get their feelings or their thoughts about the book and the story and everything.
Absolutely. Having laid out our feelings about what we want to see in the book, so we really do hope that any Muslim authors and illustrators who were thinking about the awards or haven't heard about the awards before would consider submitting their books to next year's awards, inshallah, as submissions are closed for this year. But this is something that we have been continuing for several years now, alhamdulillah, and we have the intention, inshallah, to keep going in the future because we really do want to highlight and celebrate and uplift the wonderful Muslim stories, the Muslim voices, the Muslim illustrators that we have in our community. And again, the diversity of all these stories and the fact that there's so many hidden gems that many of us just never find out about. Like you and I are so involved in the Muslim bookish circles, and yet every year we receive books in the submissions that we never heard of before, that we never came across before.
Yes.
And we get so
Yeah.
excited because there's just wonderful books, stories that just
Yeah.
blew our minds away. And we're like, we had no idea that this was out there.
The award season is an exciting season. It just opens doors to see books that we've never seen before, a fresh, Because in the West, and we are very familiar of what comes out from traditional publishers and the 3, 4 main Muslim publishers every year. We're in the loop of those titles, but when we get books from publishers we don't know that are in different parts of the world, it just makes it so exciting that so many Muslims around the world, they see the need for Muslim kidlit and they're doing something about it.
Absolutely. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for another wonderful bookish conversation. I know we could go on for hours and hours.
Endless.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, this was just a wonderful talk, and I just thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
I'm super excited for our judging process and when we announce the runner-ups and the winners, inshallah. So everybody stay
Inshallah.
tuned. January is when we announce our winners, so hang tight.
Hey everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle Muslim Matters. And check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.